Hello. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate you being here, everybody. I have a huge guest I'm very excited to talk to. As most of you know, Dr. Cornel West will be joining me in just a moment. Please take a second to hit thumbs up and hit follow and all those good things. I'll do my best to glance at the comments as well if you want to throw some things in there. Most of my live stream today will be on many platforms. However, for the entire thing, go to rumble.com/Lee Camp. It's free to watch there, rumble.com/Lee Camp. But all right, without further ado, I'm excited. I'm too excited to hold off. It's quite an honor to have him here. He is running for president of, hold on, let me check my notes, United States of America. And he's been a professor at Harvard and Princeton, and has written somewhere around 20 books. It's an honor to speak with Dr. Cornel West.
Well, brother, I salute you, though, man. You're one of the few that bring together this tremendous artistic talent of laying bare the kind of comedy in our own lives, that incongruity between our acts on the one hand and our words on the other, and still be in such deep solidarity with oppressed people, man. It's a beautiful thing to witness. I recall our time together with the Julian Assange movement. You remember there in New York?
Yeah, yes, we did.
Roger Waters and things. Yes, indeed.
Yes, it was a wonderful evening, but part of it I will never forget is that there was, it's you and me, Roger Waters, Randy Credico, many on the bill, and there's a protester out front the theater screaming just about me. Just Lee Camp is a fraud. And I tried to tell him there were more famous people to protest, and he wouldn't hear of it.
No, oftentimes that just means you're a force for good. When you're a force for good, you're going to have a lot of foes, enemies, and people who misunderstand and misconstrue you. You were cool about it. And you went on and enacted a marvelous comic performance, though, man. I remember. I said, Brother Lee, how do you just not affected by this? He gets out there and does his thing.
Thank you. Well, thank you, sir.
Little sister Katie was there.
Katie Hopper, yeah, absolutely.
We had a good time, though, man.
We had a great time. Unfortunately, Julian Assange still in prison to this day. I assume if you were president, that's something you would jump in on.
Well, no, he'd be one of the first ones I would pardon, man. He, Mumia Abu-Jamal, Leonard Peltier, H. Rap Brown, who is now Iman Al-Hameen, and bring Brother Snowden back and Asada Shakur back because she wanted to come. It would just be a matter of first trying to zero in on the political prisoners and those who tried to tell the truth about the American empire and its predatory capitalist processes and the various ways in which our legal system has been so bent against truth tellers. There's a long history of that, but I would think that one of the roles of anybody in government is to try to bend the toward the truth tellers and the justice seekers.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to just get this out of the way early because I'm sick of seeing it, and every Green Party or any third party really candidate who runs, they get it from day one, and they already are calling you a spoiler. I posted I was going to be talking to you, and someone immediately said a vote for Cornel West is a vote for Trump. So let's just get out of the way early. Are you going to spoil the perfect, pristine, immaculate, morally spotless, ethically unimpeachable 2024 recoronation of Joe Biden?
It's just amazing to me that when you attempt to both tell the truth and pursue justice and try to do it in an organized way, the focus is primarily on you rather than those who supportedly and purportedly should be speaking to these issues, has had time to speak to these issues. The Democratic Party had candidates that was dealing with issues of poor and working people, dealing with militarism abroad, dealing with Wall Street greed, dealing seriously with white supremacist practices and so forth, dealing seriously with police who often are unaccountable, then my candidacy would come along and be redundant. It would say, well, we already got these figures who are in the Democratic Party. No, Democratic Party is a party of war on Wall Street. It's a party of big business. It's a party of the wealthy. And lo and behold, as soon as somebody comes along or a group of people come along and raise their voices, they say, well, no, we look at this through the lens of the establishment. It's either these neo-fascists on the right or these neoliberals. That's the only choice we have. Why is that the only choice? Well, if you present another choice, you must be a spoiler. So I mean, the very notion of trying to downplay and minimize and trivialize, not just the voices, but most importantly, the suffering that we are talking about. That's what makes me deeply, deeply upset. And yet, you know, we see this every 4 years, though, brother. We've seen it every 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, just to throw in here also that something you said on CNN, which is many of the people that voted for Jill Stein or voted for Ralph Nader or might vote for you, we're not planning on taking part in the duopoly theatrical stunt that has become our elections. So the fact that they're voting for you does not mean they were going to vote for Joe Biden otherwise. But
that's true. We know 2/3 of the voters for Sister Jill were not going to vote for either Republican or Democratic candidate.
So political philosopher Sheldon Wolin said we live in inverted totalitarianism ruled by the anonymous corporate state. Americans kind of see the faces of these politicians and we're told these are your leaders, but really they're mainly the puppets. They're not the puppeteers. If you become president, what would you do to alter that corporate rule structure? And what would you do to avoid being captured by it?
Well, I mean, I want to begin by acknowledging Sheldon Wolin. You know, he was my thesis advisor.
Oh, was he?
at Princeton. Yes, indeed. He was one of the towering intellectuals of his day. He was the greatest radical theory of democracy of his time. And his book, Democracy, Inc., is probably a book that needs to be read and reread. But he's got magisterial texts on de Tocqueville, Politics and Vision, Volume 1, Volume 2, Past and Present. So I'm so glad that you would raise his name. He really should be more well known. And I dedicated my book, Democracy Matters, in part to him. And he's absolutely right. And one of the ways in which you attempt not to be captured is you go in with the movement behind you. See, my campaign is but a moment in a movement. If you're not part of a movement, then you get devoured by the powers that be, because there's no power and pressure behind you, and no isolated individual or no isolated small group of individuals can bring about the kind of vision, let alone change, that is needed. But I begin very much what my platform is all about: dismantling the empire. What does it mean to be head of the empire in order to dismantle it? To call into question the non-defensive security alliances, the NATOs and others, to bring back the troops, the 800 military units, the massive shift of money from the military budget or military industrial complex to investing in satisfying the basic social needs of food, shelter, quality education, quality housing, and so forth. In addition, though, to tell you the truth, it's also a matter of trying to democratize these monopolies and oligopolies. And what I mean by that is serious talk about workers' control. I think Rick Wolf is right about this. What does it mean to decentralize it? What does it mean to democratize it? What does it mean to bring it under substantive public accountability? Now, some people talk about this in terms of nationalization. Nationalization and democratization, of course, overlap in a variety of different ways, and it's a larger issue, as you can imagine, in terms of whether it's just government or whether it's the people themselves. I tend to be much more of a democratizer than a nationalizer, but nationalization can take the form of democratization if the people are seriously represented in government. But that move that is required, I think, when it comes to the most fundamental issue, and I know white supremacy is vicious, male supremacy is, homophobia, transphobia is, corporate greed is, but saving the planet, just trying to shift from the retractive and the extractive modes of interacting with Earth to the regenerative and the renewal ways, forms of energy that allows us to interact with Earth without, we can see the consequences, without promoting the kind of escalating ecological catastrophe and collapse that we are witnessing now, not just with the heat waves and fires, but in so many different forms and so many different ways, so brother. So you can imagine there's a number of different levels and registers to talk about this, but it's really about unleashing democracy, right? Back to Shell and Woolen again. And when you unleash democracy, you dismantle empire. When you unleash democracy, you allow workers to have a say, a fundamental say in shaping their destiny at the workplace. You allow women to have control over their bodies. You will have Black people speaking directly to the vicious legacy of white supremacy, ending the co-ops, the cop cities, ending the police unaccountability, ending any form that would degrade themselves as human beings, ourselves as human beings. I'd also put a priority on empowering indigenous brothers and sisters. I've had wonderful dialogues, my dear brother Nick at the Red Media and others. What does it mean to prioritize them? To acknowledge that the United States began as a profoundly racist experiment that led toward the genocidal effects on precious human beings who were already here, and that we have an obligation, we have a duty to ensure that they're able to live lives of dignity so that they can flower and flourish. And so it means being able to sit and listen and learn from them. And how do we come up with ways of empowering them, their children, and their cultures? So you can imagine there's a number of different things, treating, migrants and asylum seekers with dignity and humanely. All of these things are on the table, but it's visionary. It's something that we're trying to aspire to, but we have to articulate it. We have to speak it with power and conviction so that people become convinced that it's something worth fighting for.
Speaking of that, and I'm glad you brought up the ecological catastrophe. I feel like many people leave that out, and because it's so drastic, so dire, and so scary that I think they don't want to delve into it. And of course, indigenous have led that fight in so many ways to protect our environment. But I wanted to ask you, you're absolutely going to win this election. Obviously, you will be the next president. But if you were to lose, do you feel your candidacy can still achieve things? What can your run achieve, even if you weren't the next president?
Oh man, one is, brother, for me, see, I decided, 55 years ago that I was going to run for truth and justice until I die. And it took the form of teaching in classrooms, it took the form of hitting the street and going to jail, it took the form of writing books, it took the form of 3 records, including working with Prince and Gerald Levert, Jill Scott, and so we won't get into all the music. Or Arturo O'Farrill, we won a Grammy together, right? The Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra, 4 Questions tied to Du Bois's text. It takes a lot of different forms. And so running for president is just another form. And so, if I win, I've told my beautiful wife, I'm not moving into the White House until everybody has a house, because I'm an abolitionist when it comes to houselessness and homelessness. I'm an abolitionist when it comes to poverty. And so the very fact of winning in the sense of being having access to the White House, as opposed to not winning and having access to the same running for truth and justice, is for me it's I acknowledge it, you see, but I tell you, man, I just gave the keynote of the 10th anniversary of Black Lives Matter here in Los Angeles and Lamont Park on the chocolate side of LA. And just spending those 6 hours with those folk, mainly Black folk, and looking in their eyes and seeing that they identify with a cracked vessel like me trying to tell the truth, because they know how rotten the 2-party system is. They know how corrupt the politicians are. They know the role of big money and big lobbyists. They know the role of how the wealthy shapes the framework that makes it difficult for us to select any candidates of inequality between the corporate duopoly. And just raising the voice, almost like a musician, just raising the voice becomes an inspiration. You know it as an artist on stage, doing your comedy, the legacy of Richard Pryor and Moms Mabley and Dick Gregory and George Carlin and so forth. Did they make a difference? Hell yes. Were they elected? Hell no. Did they have impact on our lives? I don't exist without Richard Pryor, Miles Mabry, and George Carlin.
And Dick Gregory ran for president, too.
And Dick Gregory got 46,000 votes in 1968 as a write-in. He got more votes than Edward Cleaver that year. Edward Cleaver ran on Peace and Freedom Party.
You were speaking of your other pursuits. You were one of the elders of Zion in the original Matrix movies in the 1990s. The fact you were an elder in the 1990s doesn't say much for your age, though, Dr. West.
Well, Wachowski, they were so kind to me. Those are two geniuses, brother. Two artistic geniuses. They were very kind to me.
And speaking of their genius, many people feel that the Matrix is an allegory for the alienation, the alienating forces of capitalism. And you're one of the few presidential candidates who even dares say the C word, capitalism. Can you talk about whether we as a species need to evolve beyond this broken economic system, or how you see that moving forward, and whether the environmental breakdown we're now seeing, with climate crisis being at the top of the list, whether that breakdown is connected to the motivational drives of capitalism?
Well, one is it's clear that the greed of the fossil fuel companies is a major factor in pushing the species on the edge of the cliff. That's just a fact. It really is. And it's true that there's greed in each and every one of us. You know, as a Christian, I don't try to reduce any social system down to just we human beings. We got a long history of being greedy and hateful under a variety of different systems: feudalism, capitalism, communism as actually practiced in the Soviet Union, and so forth, right? But when you have a system that argues that greed is good, it's not something to be restrained, it's not something that ought to be answerable to something bigger than itself, like people's interests, poor people's needs, and so forth, then you end up where we are now, which is in a very, very grim and dim moment. There's no doubt about that. And so one could argue that, you know, if we don't bring an end to predatory capitalism, then we're talking about the end of the world. And it's tied also to the militarism. That's part of the debate about the Ukraine these days, is that, you know, for me, Trump, gangster, neo-fascist, no doubt about that. He's pushing the country toward the second civil war. Biden's pushing the world toward the third world war. The proxy war that's going on pressures Ukrainian suffering in ways we don't have a language for. But there's no doubt that NATO has always been an arm of the U.S. imperial order. It's always been an arm of U.S. hegemony. And that when they promised that they would not move 1 inch toward Russia, and a few years later you end up with 13 formerly related Soviet countries as part of NATO. It's no longer just defensive, it's offensive. We saw it in Libya. We've seen it in Yugoslavia in 1994, the NATO more and more now targeting also China. And the great W.B. Du Bois, when he wrote 1945, my brother, he's leaving San Francisco. He almost wrote it with tears in his eyes. It was June 26, 1945, in the Chicago Defender, The Winds of Time. He said, I foresee a third world war that attempts to suppress Asia and strangle Russia. And the U.S. empire would be leading it. Now, Du Bois is not right on everything. Nobody's right on everything. But when you actually look at the dominant forces on the globe these days, and the American empire in external decline, internal decay, trying to convince Europe to be not simply dependent on them, but to be open to their own U.S. imperial ends and aims, so that it can lead toward nuclear exchange in terms of the life and logic of what's going on in the Ukraine right now. You see, the invasion was criminal. I'd be the first to acknowledge it. No doubt about that, you see. But we also know that if Russia had missiles, Canada or Mexico, what would the U.S. empire do? Shoot them down the same day, brother. That's how empires behave. That's how nation states behave, you see. And so the idea that we have some kind of moral authority or some kind of ethical status. Let us tell the truth. Let us respect people, American people, the world, to tell the truth. And it's very important. You see, for me, this campaign is as much part of an international movement as a national one. I'm concerned about those Frantz Fanon called the wretched of the earth in every corner of the globe. Every corner of the globe. So that the dismantling of empire is a matter of trying to empower poor and working people in other parts of the world who are trying to come to terms with their own national bourgeoisies, their own power elites who are not speaking to their needs. African elites in Africa, not speaking to the needs of African poor and working people. Latin American elites, not speaking to the needs of Latin American poor and working people. Same would be true in Asia and so on. So we're cutting against the grain on a number of different fronts, not just Biden and Trump. This is a global project that we're talking about, or being part of a global project.
Yeah, I always try and remind people they have far more in common with your average working person in Russia or China or Iran or Cuba or any of those places than we have with the top of the ruling elite. So the idea that everybody is their nation, you know, we're told to believe everybody in China or Russia is evil and they're going to get you. It's just nonsense, just xenophobic nonsense. People wanted me to ask you this, and I wanted to show you this. I did a very official poll on Twitter as to who was going to win the presidential election on @LeeCamp on Twitter. And you are easily winning against Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and RFK Jr. But people wanted me to ask you, you know, your views on RFK Jr. I know there are some fans of his watching, and also it's as part of that, your view on why to run as a third party instead of try to break open the Democratic Party as many people believe Bernie Sanders did or tried to.
I mean, I think that one of the lessons I learned from my dear brother Bernie Sanders, who I have deep love for, even given our disagreements, is that the Democratic Party is beyond redemption in terms of speaking to the needs of poor and working people, that they use progressives as window dressing. That at the center of the party is corporate interests. At the center of the party is Wall Street. And they're not going to budge. Same is true. The center of the party is the militarism, not just around the world. You see it even now, you know, in the Middle East in terms of our what's going on in Israel and the class struggles within Israel among the Jewish brothers and sisters themselves, and then the vicious Israeli occupation of our precious Palestinian brothers and sisters. The Democratic Party, you know, they're so tied into the militarism in that context and supporting the militarism of the Israeli Defense Forces against precious Palestinians that I just, unfortunately, we're going to have to come up with something different. We've got to come up with an alternative, one way or the other. It reminds me in some ways of the 1850s when you had both parties supporting slavery. And somebody said, well, you're a spoiler if you're anti-slavery. You're a spoiler if you're an abolitionist. You got to support a party that supports white supremacist slavery. No, this is a line in the sand. Frederick Douglass and the others said we got to create, and they tried, and they ended up with the Liberty Party, and then later on became, of course, the Republican Party. The last winner of a third party effort was Abraham Lincoln. We should remind him. Right. We should remind the country of that in that regard. But I must say though, man, that boy, we between a rock and a hard place. There's no doubt about it.
I'm glad you bring that up because speaking of a rock and a hard place, I am actually working with a presidential campaign. I'm the campaign manager for a literal rock that I'm running for president that I found out in the yard, and it's because you kind of ruined it because I wanted someone who was not a war criminal, never supported any war, never taken a corporate dollar. And so I created yardrock2024.com. Then you jumped in and now it's kind of confusing. Maybe he can be your VP or something.
No, I'm going to take the rock with me though, brother. Put it in my pocket and say it's connected to my dear brother Lee.
But I wanted to ask you, I was down there with you at Occupy Wall Street on some of those days many years ago. A friend of mine actually shared a jail cell with you during those protests. Can you talk about the choice in those moments, in those movements, to get arrested and what that means to you, what you believe it achieves, and also what it says about the state of policing in our system?
I mean, one is that we all have to raise the issue: what are we going to do with our lives between our mother's womb and tomb? And what kind of witness will we bear? What kind of work will we do? And with Brother Randy and myself and Brother Carl Dix and Stephen and Jim Bretos and others, and we went to jail for stop and frisk. That goes all the way back to 2011, even before Occupy in that regard. Or when Chris Hedges and I put Goldman Sachs on trial right there on the street, had the hearing and so forth. It's just a matter of saying, well, I want to bear a witness, and I've got to do it collectively. I've got to do it with a group, because I'm reading the historical forces and I'm seeing the decentering of the American empire, just as we saw the decentering of Europe in the 1940s. Those European empires were slowly fading away, given the decolonization efforts that were taking place, and with the indescribably evil of the concentration camps and the indescribably evil of the fascisms of various sorts. It was clear that the age of Europe was over. And you got the American Empire and the Soviet Empire. Both of those entities took over. Soviet Empire collapsed, 1991. American Empire was the only one. The 68th Empire of the 70s that's emerged since Africa, since the beginnings of our species. And empires come and go. There's no doubt about that. And usually, like the Roman Empire, it's military overreach, it's corruption of elites, it's citizens feeling helpless and hopeless, and people trying to provide some alternative. Cato the Younger and Cicero are fighting against Julius Caesar. You got Spartacus organizing the enslaved people themselves, bringing power and pressure to bear. Neither one of them being successful. The Roman Empire went its own very ugly way, and it ended up, of course, imploding. Well, America, what are you going to do? Now, part of my campaign is say, well, America, I want to introduce you to the best of yourself. Who's the best of yourself? Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, John Brown, Rabbi Heschel, Edward Said, Grace Lee Boggs. We can go on and on. That's the best of yourself. Dick Gregory, George Carlin, Stevie Wonder, John Coltrane. And it's not a function of skin pigmentation. We know that. It's not a function of gender. We know that. It's not a function of sexual orientation. It is a matter of opposing white supremacy, male supremacy, and transphobia and homophobia and predatory capitalism. That's been the best of the country. Eugene Debs and others. All of them had their own limitations. The bell hooks and others. All of them had their own blind spots, but they were forces for good in an empire that was in denial about it even being an empire, often in denial about its vicious legacy of white supremacy, in denial about the greed that sits at the center of its predatory capitalist orientation, in denial about what it actually did to indigenous peoples. And we can go on and on. Denial was always a sign of not just immaturity, but pseudo-innocence. And you can't be innocent when you're the author of devastation, as James Baldwin used to say. And you have to take that seriously without feeling as if you can't change. All of us can change. All of us can be transformed. Look at yourself, but you stayed out of Richmond, Virginia. Now, Richmond, Virginia, man, the capital of Confederacy. Yep. Oh, Lord have mercy. How you going to get a courageous, visionary artist whose heart is golden in solidarity with the poor coming out of Richmond, Virginia on the chocolate, on the vanilla side of town? Well, keep track of Lee Camp. Keep track of Lee Camp. He's a human being who's decided to live a life of integrity, honesty, decency, and generosity. None of us have purity. We don't want purity. We're human. And so that's the kind of thing we need to make more accessible and available in our language and in our action with our fellow citizens and our fellow human beings around the world, though, brother.
Thank you so much. That means the world coming from you, but also just for your other words during this half hour. I really appreciate it, and thank you for your continued fight for justice and truth. And I hope we speak soon.
We will speak anytime you call. I salute you, my brother, and God bless you and your loved ones, man, your precious family and things.
All right, thank you, Dr. West.
Definitely. Thanks so much.
All right, there it is, Dr. Cornel West. I feel like we can all learn a lot from the words he's saying. We can all learn so much. If I just get him to take that rock as the VP, then I think we'll have a quality run for this presidency. Thank you guys so much for joining. Please click thumbs up and click subscribe and all that good stuff. And please share this. I got some more news stories I'm going to chat about right now. And we'll keep going. We'll keep going with this hour. I'm gonna fill it up for you. Why not? Why not? Because I know my normal schedule is Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, but Monday was a partial episode because internet issues. So I'm giving you more today to make up for it. And by the way, I'm still trying to find out whether it's open to everyone. I think maybe it is, but there'll be August 5th. There'll be a Green Party convention that I'm performing at. So and Cornel West will be in attendance, but I'll be performing there. So I'll get you those details. But I hope that you also will become a member at leecamp.locals.com. It's right there on the screen, leecamp.locals.com. And if you can become a member for 38 cents an episode, $6 a month, but you can also become a member for free, and you just don't get everything, but you get a lot of it. So please become a member at least for free over at leecamp.locals.com. And I'll show you again. That's yardrock2024.com. If you want to go check that out. There is some merch there. 50% of all the proceeds go to eliminate medical debt for struggling Americans. We've already eliminated $30,000 of medical debt because the way it works is you can multiply the donation, you can multiply the amount of debt that is deleted, that is erased for struggling Americans via RIP medical debt. So go check that out. There's Yard Rock merch. There's also Redacted Tonight merch that I thought, people probably, even though Redacted Tonight's not around anymore, people probably like having the T-shirt or the thing that got redacted. My TV show got redacted from the face of the earth, and now you can wear a T-shirt of the thing that no one is allowed to watch anymore. And, what's cooler than that? What's cooler than wearing the T-shirt for the thing that has been censored from the world? All right, but let's move on. Let's move on with a couple more stories, a few more stories. Let's do it. Oh, and in a few minutes, like I said, this will just be at rumble.com/LeeCamp. That's rumble.com/LeeCamp. Yeah. Oh, and tomorrow, this is a week of a couple weeks of big guests, big stuff going on for this channel. I just hit 50,000 subscribers on Rumble as well. But tomorrow I'm talking to Professor Jared Ball. A lot of you love him. He's one of the best known leftist black presenters, I guess, talking heads, whatever you want to call them, on YouTube. So one of the most well known, one of the most looked up to. So check out that interview tomorrow. Also, next week I'll be talking to Jill Stein as well, former presidential candidate Jill Stein. And we'll be posing a lot of these questions to her and see what she thinks about being called a spoiler, because she clearly got Trump elected, right? Because everyone who voted for Jill Stein would have voted for Hillary Clinton. No, I'm sorry. That's not how that works. I thought this was a good story to bring you next because we're talking about the corruption of the Democratic Party. We're talking about how it has been just Swiss cheese, just eaten through like termites through a piece of wood that's turning to dust, and just by corruption and greed. And so I thought a good thing to bring you would be actually even mainstream media has started to realize that the so-called squad, AOC, are not actually standing up for the things that some people thought they would. This is from New York Magazine. This is not a small publication. This is not my show. This is New York Magazine. This is AOC is just a regular old Democrat now. They are letting you know. And they make some great points in it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, recent appearances on Pod Save America podcast, which, for those who don't know, that is a podcast that is completely run and operated and hosted by Obama staffers. So you can imagine if she's being invited on there, what exactly does she stand for now? But it's beyond just being invited on there. On Pod Save America, the author is saying her appearance had for me the feeling of a final disappointment, the kind that's a little sad but brings a set of quixotic hopes to a close. AOC appeared on the popular Crooked Media show to announce her endorsement of Joe Biden for president of the 2024 election. Because AOC, who was supposedly outside of the Republican Party, that was the idea, right? She's standing on the outside, banging on the window, saying, we are the real people. We are the real left, and we want in there. She was supposedly that when she first showed up. And here she is endorsing Joe Biden like a fucking year and a half before the election. She just wanted to get in early with that endorsement. She wanted to make sure people knew early that she was with the establishment. To deliver that particular endorsement while appearing on that particular podcast was to send a very deliberate message. It was AOC's last kiss-off to the radicals who had supported her, voted for her, donated to her campaign, and made her unusually famous in American politics. The beneficiary of a wholly unique cult of personality that is now starting to come undone. And let me just reiterate, this is mainstream media. This is not some crazy lefty blog. In 2021 interview with the publication Democratic Socialists of America, Ocasio-Cortez attacked left critics of the Biden administration on identitarian grounds. She said, quote, we really have to ask ourselves, what is the message that you are sending to your black and brown and undocumented members of your community, to your friends, when you say nothing has changed? Yeah, well, AOC, what's the message you're sending when you say that something has changed? What is the message that you're sending to black and brown and indigenous and every other person that is persecuted in this country under the Biden administration, under the fucking laws and ideas that Joe Biden has fought for his entire life? What kind of message are you sending when you say, yeah, that's real change? Putting the guy who wrote the laws that have doubled the prison population, that have put more black men in prison than there were slaves during slavery times. What is it to say that guy is real change? What does that say to your black and brown and, indigenous cousins and friends? The article continues, yet during the very period in which she gave that interview, the Biden administration had been busily deporting tens of thousands of undocumented immigrants, almost all of them black and brown. And by the way, the latest, to give you a little update on that, is many of you know that just recently Joe Biden changed the immigration policies to basically allow very little asylum requests. You have to book your asylum request for a refugee in advance via an app that probably no asylum seeker actually has if they have a phone when they're in the middle of the desert. And if you don't do that, then you're not even considered for asylum. That's what they did. So Biden was able to decrease people seeking asylum by basically saying people can't have asylum. Doesn't matter how much their lives are horrible, how much they need help, how much we have destroyed their society that they are running from. Didn't matter. If you didn't have the app and didn't apply online, I mean, what is this? Some sort of, is this a fucking Pokemon? Why did I say Pokemon? This is a Pokemon game on your phone. But a federal judge just shot that down and said that's illegal by our Constitution, which it should be. At a campaign event in 2018, she addressed how Brett Kavanaugh could be confirmed to the Supreme Court despite the sexual assault allegations against him, saying, when people say, how could this have happened? It is because of the slow slide of our public institutions, when too many people sat on the sidelines and read the news and said, wow, that's crazy. Time to go to class. So she's criticizing people for not taking action. And then this article continues, in her consistent fealty to the Democratic Party leadership, she has done exactly that, lamenting how crazy the world is, then hurrying off to dutifully follow the lead of her superiors. Ocasio-Cortez publicly castigated the railway companies, you remember during the railway strike, and demanded better conditions for workers, then voted to forbid the strike. So this is an ongoing theme. This is an ongoing theme for Ocasio-Cortez is she'll say something that I would agree with, that many of you may agree with, and she'll say it with a lot of certitude, a lot of feeling. Sometimes she's crying as she says it, and then she'll run off and either vote for the opposite, or she'll stand with the opposite, or she'll vote, as we're about to see, vote present instead of voting no for something. I saw someone was asking how to get my book. I'm just going to throw this in there. That the new book, Dangerous Ideas, it's an ebook, and I did just apply to have it available on ebook platforms, because until now it has only been possible to get it by becoming a member at leecamp.locals.com. However, soon, I don't think it has appeared yet, but soon it will be available on all platforms. Okay, I'm going to keep reading this article at rumble.com/LeeCamp. That's rumble.com/LeeCamp.